The current commander of the International Space Station about to break a big record tonight. Here's ABC's Gio Benitez.
They call it the Peggy factor, Mission Control's code word for the way superstar astronaut Peggy Whitson always gets the job done.
I love it up here.
Tonight, Commander Whitson making history with her record for any American. By the time she lands in September, her tally will be 666 days.
666 days in space.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
If I could turn the page and time that I'd rearrange just a day or two. Close my eyes. Then I couldn't find a way, so I settled for one day to believe in you. Tell me lies. Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Tell me lies, tell me lies. Oh no, no, you can't disguise. You can't disguise. No, you can't disguise. Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Although I'm not making plans, I hope that you understand there's a reason why. Close your eyes. No more broken hearts. We're better off apart. Let's give it a try. Tell me lies. Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Tell me lies, tell me lies. Oh no, no, you can't disguise. You can't disguise. No, you can't disguise. Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. If I could turn the page and time that I'd rearrange just a day or two. Close my eyes. I couldn't find a way, so I settled for one day to believe in you. Tell me lies. Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Tell me lies, tell me lies. Oh no, no, you can't disguise. You can't disguise. No, you can't disguise. Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Tell me lies, tell me lies. Oh no, no, you can't disguise. You can't disguise. No, you can't disguise. Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Drink the astronauts took to the moon.
Astronauts to the moon.
One striking aspect of Parsons' private life that has been well documented outside of official governmental sources and publications is his curious association with an individual known as Aleister Crowley. Given Crowley's overwhelming and intensely controversial interests, the demonstrable importance of Crowley in Jack Parsons' private and professional life, stay tuned, and an inexplicable Crowleyan pattern that has recently emerged in all JPL missions, one feels compelled to ask at this late date, who was Aleister Crowley? And what was his heretofore unseen but apparently highly influential role in the founding and evolution of this critical national space facility called JPL. Aleister Crowley was the premier self-styled Western magician of the 20th century, who some have called the most evil man in the world. Crowley simply termed himself the Great Beast. He wouldn't invite him to dinner. Whose secret name in his order was Phoenix, for reasons that will later become apparent. Parsons became one of Crowley's greatest students and was said to have been his personally chosen successor. Let me repeat that. We have documentation, no question, that Parsons was selected by Crowley to be his successor in these arcane, magical rituals and ceremonies and practices. This is not something you're going to get from a NASA press release, all right?
I'm trying to find my true path. There's only two kinds of people in this whole world. The ones who want to follow the rules and the ones who want to break them. Who says we have to obey?
Father, how do you know when you're in the presence of evil? Jack seems compelled.
My father taught me about symbols like this. He said that they were gateways.
Gateways to what?
Rockets are the future, whether you want to believe in them or not.
You can be the man you've always dreamed of being. You just need to have an open mind.
I promise you, our life will never be boring.
Parsons quickly moved up the ranks of Crowley's organization called the Order of the Eastern Temple and was eventually appointed head of the lodge in Pasadena by Crowley himself. Parsons swore an oath of allegiance to guide humanity into, quote, an age of communion with the gods. Is this something you're going to read in NASA's official stuff? Using his demonstrable vast talents of insight and science and, in his own words, magic. The objectives of those like Crowley who practice Western magic is ostensibly, quote, to advance humanity by contact with higher intelligence. That is, read with extraterrestrials. Gosh, is that what they're up to? Either by calling them down or traveling to their planets, which, if the objects on STS-48 and STS-80 are what they now appear to be, we almost certainly can. These are things you've seen on the UN briefing, and you're going to see before Christmas on our analysis of the shuttle video that was downlinked live by NASA in December of last year. According to Crowley, one can contact these higher intelligences by becoming one with them. That is, by metamorphing into man-gods, or supermen. This was Crowley's primary goal, attainable in his beliefs through the ancient systems of the Hebrew and Greek Kabbalah and other forms of metaphysical, quote, science. All practitioners of magic, philosophically based occultists such as the Theosophists or Freemasons, have been consumed with interest of finding the origins of the human race. You just have to read what they write. It is claimed by the founders of many of these secret orders that they have received guidance from direct contact with those who call themselves the secret chiefs of the Great White Brotherhood. These masters, we are told, have literally dictated the laws and agendas of these mystery schools of ancient thought and wisdom. Now, Crowley, in the latter part of the last century and the beginning of this, the 20th, claimed to have had many such indescribable contacts, but two were of the greatest importance in apparently redirecting his entire life and thus changing the face of modern magic for all who followed. And as astonishing as it may seem, it may be that almost a century ago, Crowley was given a revelation about things that are coming to pass, even as we speak here tonight. The first contact that Crowley relates was in April of 1904 in Cairo. Cairo, by the way, is Seleucid Arabic for Mars. Crowley tells us that he encountered an entity who he considered to be his, quote, holy guardian angel. This entity identified himself as Aiwass and proceeded to dictate to Crowley the so-called Book of the Law, or what would eventually become, to some, the canon of 20th century magical practice. In this book, Aiwass decrees that, quote, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And then he goes on to say, and I am a god of war and vengeance. I want to get something up here. I am a god of war and vengeance. Choose ye an island and fortify it. Dung it about with enginery of war. I will give you a war engine. And with it you shall smite the people, and none shall stand before you. I am the warrior lord of the 40s. Remember, this was channeled by Crowley in 1904. The last statement is astonishing and quite prophetic, considering it was dictated 40 years before World War II and 93 years before the revelations you have seen this evening, 93 being the number of the Book of the Law. But more about that significance later. Aiwass also gave Crowley a code, a cipher, which is being used by some ufologists in their continuing efforts to decode some UFO contactee experiences. And I have no experience whatever with the use of that, so it's merely part of the record. Here's where things get very curious. Parsons' wife and magical partner, Marjorie Cameron, stated in 1953, in a book written by the successor to Crowley after Parsons kind of blew up, as we will discuss in a moment, stated in 53 that she believed that the war engine referred to by Aiwass was none other than the flying saucer. That it would one day bring her back home to Mars, which she believed was somehow her birthplace, thus escaping a future perilous event destined for Earth. This, of course, speaks to the Phoenix theme, so prevalent in Crowleyan lore. This perilous event, according to Crowley, was to usher in the secret eon, or secret ion, depending upon how you spell it, thought to be embedded in humanity, which could be prematurely, before the actual predicted date, made manifest for the initiated through ritual sex magic. Now, one of the curious things that David Oates, when we did the presentation up in Pasadena, withheld until I kind of forced him to put it on the table, was that a lot of the backwards reverse speeches of the NASA JPL Pathfinder team have to do with sex with the rocks. It's on the tapes. We are told that Tibet is where these masters of the Great White Brotherhood, also called the Himalayan Brotherhood, originate. In this mythology, the Aryan race itself is also believed to have come from the mountains of Tibet, lying at 33 degrees north latitude. Strange but true, Roswell, the UFO crash in 1947, Mount Palomar, the largest post-war observatory, Rancho Santa Fe, Heaven's Gate, White Sands, the first A-bomb test, Nagasaki, Japan, the second A-bomb dropped, and Baghdad, Iraq, highlight, of course, of the Gulf War, and Phoenix, Arizona. The Phoenix Lights moving across the city at 19.5 degrees, and Dallas, site of the Kennedy assassination, are all at 33 degrees. Incidentally, Santiago, Chile, which lies at 33 south, where the anomalous NASA UFOs on the STS-80 video were initially filmed, is also apparently an interesting part of this pattern, which we'll lay out in more detail when we produce the video. The word Aryan, incidentally, comes from the word Aries, which is the first sign of the Western astrological zodiac, ruled, of course, by Mars. There are many legends concerning Tibet that speak of a race of supermen inhabiting this region on Earth, a legend which many German intelligentsia and pre-World War II occult societies, like the Thule Society, which Hitler was a member of, adhered to. Unbeknownst to most of the world today, the founders of the Nazi Party, starting with Hitler himself, were steeped in these occult traditions and were profoundly influenced by the teachings of the secret Thule Society, whose demonstrably racist ideologies were a warped version of theosophy and ancient German mythology. By the time of Hitler's rise, most of pre-World War II European occult traditions were dominated by the magical system that Crowley painstakingly created. And Hitler himself was envious of Crowley's infamy as the most evil man in the world, as well as his magical prowess. Hitler said this in several volumes, including one called Hitler Speaks. Crowley claims that his second otherworldly encounter, which resulted in an even more profound influence on his work in magic, occurred at Montauk, Long Island in New York in 1918. This entity introduced himself as Lamb, which Crowley was quick to point out meant pathmaker, pathfinder, in the Tibetan language. It is from this word that Lam-as of Tibet are so called. The lamb was also the ancient symbol for Aries, Mars, as well as the resurrected god, Tammuz, Osiris, Christ, etc. Rising from the ashes, Crowley drew an effigy of Lamb, which eerily represents the popular modern image of an alien some half a century later. The lamb was also the ancient symbol for Aries, Mars, as well as the resurrected god, Tammuz, Osiris,
Foundation stone of our new nation, built on all those principles that we hold dear.
The plans for our new capital city already have a very Masonic feel to them, yeah. Already have a very Masonic feel to them, yeah. Already have a very Masonic feel to them, yeah.
Candidate for initiation into the order, I'm giving him a little introduction into some of our mysteries. These two gentlemen are founding an entire nation built on our principles.
We have great promises for our new nation. You know, I wonder if other presidents after me will also be Freemasons.
Many will be. And Freemasonry will become embedded in the American culture. And the eye will appear on the banknotes.
Oh, God.
America will produce a great many great Americans from many different walks of life and many different fields, and many will be Masons. Sportsmen, actors, writers, soldiers, filmmakers, businessmen, inventors, astronauts.
What on earth is an astronaut?
No, they're not.
I don't follow.
Well, they're not on Earth, they're in space. In fact, Brother Buzz Aldrin was the second man to walk upon the surface of the moon.
That's the best thing I've heard this evening.
What, that a Mason walked on the moon?
Man on the moon. Amazing. But don't forget the musicians. Do not forget the musicians.
Let's go over a timeline that I made. I tried to keep it as simple as possible. Alright, so in 1915, NACA was founded, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. NACA was established by the federal government, and their mission statement was, "It shall be the duty of the Advisory Committee for Aeronautics to supervise and direct the scientific study of the problems of flight with a view to their practical solution." In 1923, Disney was founded. Walt Disney, of course, grew up in the Demolay, a young boy's version of Masonry. Continuing on, in 1936, JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, was founded, in part by Jack Parsons, an avid follower of Aleister Crowley and a member of his fraternal organization, the OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis. Jack Parsons also hung out with L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of the Church of Scientology, which holds sci-fi-like religious beliefs, including the belief of a galactic dictator named Xenu. Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard both practiced black magic and participated in sex magic rituals together. In 1954, Walt Disney and the father of rocket technology in the United States, Wernher von Braun, meet and make 3 films about space exploration. One was called Man in Space.
Here to introduce you to this new series is Walt Disney.
In our modern world, everywhere we look, we see the influence science has upon our daily lives. Discoveries that were miracles a few short years ago are accepted as commonplace today. Many of the things that seem impossible now will become realities tomorrow.
Just a couple years later, in 1958, NACA is transformed into NASA, and the space program begins with projects like Mercury and Gemini. In 1966, filmmaker Stanley Kubrick meets with NASA employees as well as Arthur C. Clarke. Pretty damning photograph. 3 years before the first moon landing, Kubrick just happens to be running with NASA and a well-known author of science fiction books, who also predicted satellites in 1945. Arthur C. Clarke's work includes Childhood's End, which was made into a 3-part series on Sci-Fi Channel in 2015. Very interesting series with so-called aliens, but they look like the epitome of Satan, and they come to usher in the new golden age for humanity.
There is no need to be afraid.
In 1968, Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was developed concurrently with Stanley Kubrick's film version. Fun fact, between 1968, when the movie was made, and 2001, when the movie takes place, that is exactly 33 years. They did the exact same thing with 9/11. The Twin Towers began construction in 1968, and they were knocked down in 2001, exactly 33 years later. Anyway, this not only served as practice for Stanley Kubrick, as he was given pointers on how space should be portrayed by Arthur C. Clarke, but this was also mental conditioning for the masses. 2001: A Space Odyssey was the #1 movie in the box office in 1968. And 1 year later, in 1969, Apollo 11 claims to land men on the moon for the first time. President Richard Nixon called Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin from the White House to congratulate them.
Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made from the White House. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you have done.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here.
Meanwhile, I can't get cell phone service in the mountains here in Colorado. Later on in the same year, Apollo 12 lands men on the moon for the second time. Then in 1971, both Apollo 14 and 15 successfully land men on the moon. In 1972, both Apollo 16 and 17 also successfully land men on the moon. So that's 6 successful moon landings between 1969 and 1972. And it just suddenly stops there. In 1981, Masonic Television, aka MTV, begins, starting right off with the usage of Apollo footage and continuing to use the Apollo program as their theme to further condition the masses on a wide scale, especially the younger generation. Make the Apollo missions cool and hip. Apollo missions, they're the hip thing to do. If MTV wasn't ran out of a Masonic temple, it wouldn't be such a dead giveaway, but they do, and it so happens that many NASA astronauts and employees are Freemasons. Now it's 2018, and nothing has happened since 1972. It's been just over 45 years, and that's a lot of time to be stagnant after 6 back-to-back moon landings.
NASA's official logo. If you've ever looked at NASA's official logo, both their official insignia and their official seal, you'll see that the most prominent object in the seal is a red swooshing object. They call that the chevron or the vector. If you ask NASA's Public Affairs Office, this symbology is featured so heavily in their insignia and seal, they'll give you what really amounts to the standard facile cover story for the unilluminated. They'll tell you that that is a representation of a hypersonic wing design from the 1950s, which was the time the logo was created. Not exactly the case. Someone might want to ask the Russian Federal Space Agency, Roscosmos, that was formed in 1992, why they chose that same logo. And while you're at it, you can go ask the Chinese, who formed their space agency in 1996, why in the world they're using a hypersonic wing design from the 1950s as their official logo. Then you can ask the Japanese, the South Koreans, Taiwanese, Malaysia, Mexico, Iran, all of these countries, even Bulgaria, they all utilize the vector symbology in their space agency logos for their national space agencies. It gets even deeper. You can go look at the individual manned program patches for NASA. The Mercury program, for example, a blatant use of covert symbology. In every logo dealing with the Mercury program, you'll see what looks like a number 7 in their logo. And again, NASA's official story is that they put this number 7 there so that they could pay homage to the original 7 Mercury astronauts. Kind of forgetting the fact that only 6 Mercury astronauts actually flew into space because number 7 never did. Slayton had a heart problem, so he didn't get to go up. So there were only 6 Mercury astronauts. Yet there's a 7 in every single logo. That's in the official mission or official program insignia for Mercury, as well as the 6 individual mission patches carry this logo. And it carries on to the Space Shuttle program. If you look at the Apollo logo has a big letter A in it. At least that's what they want you to believe. But it's not. Again, that's just a simple way of explaining away the inclusion of this vector symbology in the logo. If you go to the Space Shuttle program, the original Space Shuttle STS program patch is a triangular patch that, again, hides the use of the chevronic vector symbology. And that also goes for many of the STS-specific mission patches. Every single one of the International Space Station expedition patches carry the vector symbology. The Russian Mir Space Station used the vector symbology. That was their official logo. And you can even go deeper and look at military-industrial complex companies. Look at the logo on a company like Lockheed Martin, 2 vectors. The X-Prize logo, Ames Research Labs, the U.S. Space Command, when you get into the military realm, the United States Space Command, their official logo is the vector symbol. And when you look at the military's individual space-specific programs, all of them deal with vector symbology in their official insignias. And the question really becomes, who or what are these people paying off?
This is around the time the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits, were founded in 1540. They are largely responsible for the spread of heliocentrism.
Notice the sun in their logo. It's because they are sun worshippers and want nothing more than for all of humanity to also worship the sun. Here is what the earth was depicted like thereafter.
This was created by a Jesuit scholar in 1665.
Yes, the heliocentric globe model of the world has always had its advocates, but these celebrated figures throughout history have almost all been easy to spot Freemasons, and I should note that Freemasonry is a form of Judaism.
And the founder of the Jesuits, Ignatius of Loyola, was a crypto-Jew.
A crypto-Jew is a Jew who converts to another religion and outwardly embraces the new religion, while secretly maintaining Jewish practices.
And the truth, quite frankly, is out of this world.
Did you guys catch that Air Force patch? Anyway, after I saw that segment, I insisted on researching more. I found early on that this symbol may also be referred to as a delta. Makes enough sense. Anyway, here's a few more space agencies from different parts of the world with the same symbolism. I put a link to another great video on the subject that covers more as well. What's interesting about the UK logo is that it appeared on Doctor Who 3 years prior to its establishment. Speaking of sci-fi shows, did NASA and the Air Force copy off of Star Trek, or did Star Trek copy off of them? I do know that someone that designed some of the Star Trek logos was also contracted to create some of the NASA logos. That doesn't make it any less weird. In fact, I think it makes it weirder. Russia and China too? Also, NASA goes out of their way to mimic Star Trek? They have a full timeline laid out on the show. The top 2 rows are the evolution of our space programs, and the bottom row is the evolution of the United Nations. It goes from the United Nations to the United Earth in 2150, and finally to the United Federation of Planets in 2161. You guys know the quote, "Life imitates art"? Well, it couldn't be more true, but I would replace the word art with the word programming.